Hey everyone, Jim Coventry from Rotowire here going through today's NFL training camp news and notes from a fantasy football perspective. Let's start out with the Chiefs rushing attack, which is our feature today. So Adam Teicher of ESPN.com is reporting that Ronald Jones has been the number 2 running back for much of Chiefs camp. What that really tells us is for right now, Andy Reid is using veteran deference to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Spent a first-round pick on him 2 years ago. Edwards-Helaire has been on the field. He's been injured. He's been largely ineffective, struggled greatly near the goal line, hasn't quite been the factor in the screen game as when Andy Reid tried to compare Edwards-Helaire to Brian Westbrook. That quite hasn't panned out yet. Do we say it's the injuries? I tend to think when Edwards-Helaire has been healthy, he has not gotten what is there for him. And here is what I mean. First of all, the Chiefs have been able to draw defenses into the highest rate of light boxes in the league. Defenses are terrified of Patrick Mahomes. And at the time they had Tyreek Hill, they still have Travis Kelce. Defenses would put more defensive backs. And last year, as we saw, the 2 high safeties became a really big deal. Well, over the 2 years Edwards-Helaire has been there, the first year the offensive line was not very good. They had injuries. They didn't have enough depth. But last year, they invested heavily in their offensive line, and they had a devastating run blocking unit. So now if you're taking a great run blocking unit with light boxes, we saw Jerick McKinnon just crush in the playoffs. But you see, here's the deal. Andy Reid is a pass-centered coach. If Jerick McKinnon in those playoff games, against Cincinnati especially, I should say, that's when they lost, he was grinding out chunks of yardage, 5, 6, 10 yards at a pop. They could have just stuck with the run. They would have won that game. But Andy Reid cannot go away from his roots, which is fine. He's been successful, right? He won a Super Bowl. He got to a Super Bowl with the Eagles. He's gotten to another Super Bowl with the Chiefs. So he's been successful. So he's going to stay with what he believes in. And he has an elite quarterback. But you see, here's the problem. We get back to this now. Edwards-Helaire, in my opinion, had much more, as we say, meat on the bone. And he has not taken advantage of that. So he's been fine, but he has not been when he needs to be. Ronald Jones, on the other hand, now he's on his 3rd team. Basically, he is an inconsistent running back. He put weight on into his career, and he's a much bigger back who's decisive, and that's a good thing. But there are some ball security issues. There are occasional concentration laps in the receiving game, some drops. And so he's a player that hasn't always been ultra reliable. And we know with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay, reliability is paramount. So yes, fantasy managers are a little bit excited about Ronald Jones because they see the opportunity. And if Jones is going to run hard with that offensive line in light boxes, there is a world where he could be really productive. So that's the rub right now. So Edwards-Helaire is being drafted in the top, just outside the top 24 running backs. Well, Ronald Jones is being drafted about running back 49. So there's almost a double price there, like a significant discount. So if you think Jones is going to be a factor, well, then the ADP is well worth drafting him. Whereas Edwards-Helaire, if you believe it's been injuries that have held him back, well, then his ADP at top outside the top 24 running backs is an absolute steal, because if he gets on the field and he plays well, it's his job to lose. Andy Reid is making that very clear right now. But if, as I think, he's just not been as effective as he needs to be, that's problematic. And at his ADP, he's going to be in a massive timeshare. Now, Isaiah Pacheco is getting a lot of preseason buzz, but Andy Reid, some people are just quoting part of what he said. He said that, look, Pacheco is always going to run hard, and Andy Reid loves it. But the problem is, Andy Reid's pointing out he has to learn how to read the play. He needs to learn how to stagger his speeds. I'm paraphrasing this. And as a running back, you can't just go one speed. It doesn't work that way. And so Isaiah Pacheco is an interesting player being drafted as running back 65. His ADP has gone up since these positive reports have come out. But again, in this nuanced offense with the run blocking as it is, a lot of gap blocking, I don't know that Pacheco is going to be a consistent fit. He may have a role. He may see some touches, but I think a lot has to go his way for him to get there. Now, the report from Adam Teicher also said that the Chiefs may carry 4 running backs. Let me explain something. I understand most fantasy managers have given up on Jerick McKinnon, and I understand. He has not been on the field and healthy. He has not been reliable. What I do want you to see is this. In the playoffs last year, they were almost forced to go to McKinnon. But what we saw was this. Andy Reid has not been able to call up creative screen routes to his running back really since his Philadelphia days. We saw in that Pittsburgh game in the playoffs, there were a couple that came to mind, a couple of well-designed route running screens for Jerick McKinnon, and they were beautiful, well-executed plays. McKinnon pulled those off flawlessly, and that's why he was a feature in the playoffs for them. I have to think, and they re-signed him late, but McKinnon probably didn't want to go through some of the offseason stuff. I have to think McKinnon has a role in the receiving game. Yes, they're not going to run him between the tackles. They did in the playoffs. There's no way they keep him healthy. But I think he offers them such a unique skill set in the receiving game. Andy Reid can't put that genie back in the bottle. If he even uses them for 12 to 15 snaps a game in passing situations, that makes their offense better. So I think McKinnon gets a spot, and I think it's at the expense of the other running backs because remember, those receiving touches are more valuable than carries. So look, McKinnon is going to be very inconsistent with fantasy value. He's the cheapest of the 4. He's going against running back 69. If you're in a PPR league, especially in a best ball league where you don't have to pick a week when he's going to do something, that's a pretty good investment. If you have a league with deep benches and like 3 flexes, it could be a consideration there. Look, worst case scenario, you draft him late, you cut him if he's not a factor. If he doesn't make the squad, you cut him. But what I saw last year is I think that Andy Reid loves what he can do in special packages. So that's my take there. Overall, I'm really not touching the Kansas City backfield. I don't trust Ronald Jones. I don't think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to have a feature role. I think he's going to not be able to hold on to that. Pacheco, again, maybe, but I'm not going to draft him. McKinnon, again, deep leagues, I'll go after him that way. All right, let's go to some job battles here. Melvin Gordon. So first of all, he got signed late in the offseason, and we thought that Javonte Williams would be on his own. And when Gordon wasn't there, we saw Javonte getting drafted as a top 3 running back, rightfully so, right? He was so explosive last year, so elusive. Well, so now Gordon's back, and Melvin Gordon, you're reading some quotes from him today that he, feels must be certainly talking with the coaching staff that he feels he's going to be a factor in this backfield. And why wouldn't he be? This backfield was a complete split last year, almost dead even. Now we have Russell Wilson in there, and that's going to give a little more breaks and a little lightening the box a bit for both Gordon and Williams. I think they're both going to see a lot of work. I think, the NFL, a lot of teams like to use these committees, and Melvin Gordon is still a very good player. Javonte Williams may eventually be a superstar, but I think, all right, so it may not be dead 50-50, but I think Gordon gets 40 to 45% of the work. So now based on ADP, if Gordon gets 40% of the work, he's being drafted outside the top 36 running back. So that's like running back 4 territory. I think you have to go after Melvin Gordon at his ADP if you need a depth running back. He'll get work every week. And again, with Russell Wilson, I think that's going to just give the front seven's going to loosen that up a little bit and make Gordon's life even a little bit easier. He's been so reliable and good for a while. And Javonte Williams, so he's being drafted inside the top 12, and I get that. But if Russell Wilson is going to throw the ball more than Aaron Rodgers did in the same offensive system where Rodgers had averaged 533 passes over the last 2 years, it sounds like the coaching staff is considering giving Wilson more opportunity to throw. And if that rushing pie is lessened because they want to be a more explosive offense, then I think Williams gets hurt here because even if he gets 60% of the carries, being drafted as a top 12 running back, he's right at that cusp where he's really being drafted. He has to really roll aces with the work he's going to get. Now, if we're wrong and it's a 70-30 split, then Williams is a steal at his ADP. So be careful and see what your opinion is on how this backfield shakes out. But I don't see why Melvin Gordon is going to be phased out while still being very effective in the system. All right. Bryan Edwards comes up next from the Falcons. So Bryan Edwards, look, whatever you think, a lot of people like me had him on sleeper alert for last year, and it didn't work out. But if you remember, if you watch those Raiders games, when they leaned on him, it was an overtime game and a fourth quarter game when it was late, and they threw big plays. I mean, he came up and he performed and did well, but there was no consistency to continue using him. He flashed. Now maybe he didn't earn the trust of the coaching staff. I'm not sure how that all works out. But nonetheless, Brian Edwards to me showed flashes, but now he goes to Atlanta. And look, Derek Carr's a good quarterback. I don't know what Marcus Mariota is going to do for him. I mean, I have to think Kyle Pitts is a guy in the passing game. They drafted Drake London. So you think they have to be the top two. Olamide Zaccheaus is in the team's plans. They plan on using him in all different spots in the formation. So Brian Edwards is in the mix as a third receiver here and maybe even rotating with Zaccheaus. But I still think Marcus Mariota, remember back to his Tennessee days, he did really well with Delaney Walker in the middle of the field, the tight end. It was a great connection. He couldn't ever get going with Corey Davis consistently. And I think that's the rub on Mariota. I think he's really good between the hash marks, but I think when he has to throw outside and drive the ball, I think that's not his forte. And so when we're looking at that now, it may be another situation where Brian Edwards just is not in a place that's going to maximize his potential, whatever that is. So I think, look, he's going undrafted in most leagues. And the Falcons, they won 5 games last year, but they had an easy schedule. This year, the schedule is significantly tougher. And so I think they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. And I don't know if Desmond Ridder gets it at some point. He doesn't project to have a strong arm, but I still think if you're in a really deep league, taking a flyer on Edwards is not a terrible idea, especially if they somehow integrate him over the middle of the field. Although I still think Drake London on slants and Kyle Pitts are going to be the main guys. So again, deep league, long shot, and that's about as far as it goes. Same team, Tyler Algier. So look, he was listed at the bottom of the depth chart of the running backs for the Falcons, but it was already kind of fleshed out here. Arthur Smith kind of does his veteran deference thing. He's a rookie. This is very typical, and so it doesn't indicate anything. Cordero Patterson is expected to be the lead back, but that doesn't mean he's going to be grinding between the tackles. They're not going to do it. They saw him wear down last year, and they significantly cut his touches late in the year. And the other backs are Damian Williams, who back, I believe, in 2019 or so, he just come off of a couple decent seasons, but he really hasn't done much since he opted out of a season. And but overall, he's more of a receiving back, you know, change of pace guy. You're not going to run him between the tackles. And then Avery Williams is on the roster, but again, Algier's a big, rugged guy, and I do think he's going to be an interior runner. But here's the problem: how often are the Falcons going to be winning? They could win 3 games. You know, I could see them winning 3 games and they 5, maybe 6. Well, there's not many leads. So he's not going to be grinding out clock. And he may be game scripted out frequently. Damian Williams could get a lot of work as a receiving back if they're trailing, if they have to go into a hurry up in the second half of games. So Tyler Algier makes some sense if the Falcons are way better than we think. I just don't think that's going to happen. And so I think he's just going to be kind of game scripted out too frequently to be the factor that he could be. Geno Smith is next. Somebody's got to start in Seattle, right? Jimmy Garoppolo is still potentially, player to get cut. Remember, the 49ers can put over $20 million on next year's cap if they let Jimmy G go. But I think they know the only team that could use him is their division rival, Seattle. But think about this. The 49ers, sure, you don't want your quarterback or former quarterback going to a division rival. They can't see the Seahawks as a legitimate threat to be better than them with Jimmy Garoppolo. They just can't see that. I know that the Seattle team believes they're going to be really good, but their defense is still a very big work in progress. Their offensive line, they're bringing a couple of rookies in. I think it's still very problematic there. And so that said, Geno Smith, remember this. Sure, he's a starter now. Drew Lock is in the mix. In 4 games last year, Geno Smith attempted 24 passes per game and averaged 175 yards. They want to run the ball, and they only want to use Geno Smith if they have to. And that's the problem. and they're going to run at a slow pace. They're going to try to shorten games as much as they can. And unfortunately, the quarterback play and the slow pace we're expected to see. And I do expect the slow pace. We had a couple of years where they sped it up a little bit for Russell Wilson. I don't think we're doing that here. Well, Shane Waldron wanted to speed it up last year. Don't see that here. I think they understand what they have. And so that said, it just caps the upside of DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is just being drafted so late in drafts, and I get it. What can you do? Because I don't see the downfield guy being the beneficiary here with Geno Smith. So at least DK Metcalf, they could get him involved in many different ways. So that's something we have to consider away. Oh, Julie, I'm glad to see you here. Thank you for joining in. Appreciate that. And so Geno Smith, the problem is there's just not going to be volume there. And I love Noah Fant as a tight end, but again, if they're throwing 24 passes a game, a couple are going to running backs, they'll have all other receivers on the field, so we're getting maybe 7 or 8 targets for Metcalf, 4 or 5 for Lockett, 4 maybe for Noah Fant. And if they're not high leverage targets, it's just very problematic. DK Metcalf's falling in the point in drafts where it's like, okay, you can understand taking him because at that draft cost, he doesn't have to do much to meet it, but it's still very nerve-wracking to take Seattle Seahawks passing players. Brevin Jordan was in the news. First, we had Lovie Smith a week or so ago saying that Farrell Brown was his tight end. He's going to be a full-time guy. He's going to be a factor as a receiver. But look, Brevin Jordan's like a move tight end. I imagine that at some point they're going to realize Brevin Jordan is an emerging player who can make catches, but we can't trust Lovie Smith to necessarily do that. The news today, though, said Jordan could help fill the team's needed slot receiver. I get that because, look, outside of Nico Collins and Brandon Cooks, they really don't have a slam dunk third player. And Brevin Jordan may be as good as any other receiver they have on the team, even in the second year as he's trying to learn the league. But that could get him on the field. Look, he's going outside the top 24 tight ends. If you're in a tight end premium league and you're drafting as a third tight end, go ahead and take a shot at him. I still like Hayden Hurst, but his ADP is going up and up and up. The buzz on him has kind of gotten out of the bag. But the player I would take instead of Brevin Jordan, people are still sleeping on Tyler Conklin. I mean, don't forget, just a couple of years ago, Conklin took the work from Irv Smith when Smith was supposed to be the guy down the stretch when Kyle Rudolph got hurt. Tyler Conklin is a really good receiver. CJ Uzomah's a blocker who happened to work his way into work in 490 yards, I believe, last year with Joe Burrow. But you know what? That said, that was just the way it worked out. Conklin is a great late play. And like Julia said, Brevin Jordan's great value as a last pick. Definitely take a flyer. He's an athletic guy. He could definitely do some damage there. And they're going to throw. They're going to trail a lot. All right, a couple players left here. James Prochet. So the depth chart will say Devin Duvernay is the favorite to start opposite Rashad Bateman. And that's kind of been the buzz. But I'm going to say his last name wrong. Jeff Zrebic of The Athletic reports that Prochet has been one of the standouts of Ravens camp. And here's the thing. He's been getting open on all kinds of routes, including downfield routes. We didn't think he had that. He runs like a 4.63 coming out of SMU. So he has been impressive. Now, this is a team that was 57% run a couple of years ago. They're going to be a run-heavy team, but they're going to throw some games. They're going to throw, and it can't all go to Mark Andrews, and it can't all go to Rashad Bateman. Now, I'm not saying whoever the second receiver is going to see 100 targets. It might be more like 75, 80 targets. But that said, in a deeper league, James Prochet is not a terrible late-round choice, again, depending what your roster needs are. Now, it's funny because Duvernay is seen to be ahead of on the depth chart, but the fantasy football community is on this one. Duvernay is an ADP of wide receiver 90, Prochet ADP of wide receiver 76. So the fantasy community has thought Prochet is the guy all along, which I thought was interesting. Final piece for the news for today, Matthew Stafford. So now he's back to doing some throwing and individual drills, not full practice. But the fact they have him throwing, it's a month before the season. It seems to me that they have to be confident because, look, with a month to go, if they thought the elbow was something that was going to be a problem, I think they would have to just shut him down for 2 to 3 weeks and then start over and see how that works. They haven't done that. So to me, it sounds like it's a tendonitis. Tendonitis comes and goes. He'll get the best possible medical attention. He'll have plenty of ice on his elbow. It could come and go now and again. It's a pain tolerance issue. It's not usually a structural thing. We've seen Matthew Stafford play hurt. He's as tough as they come. So look, if you're averse to risk averse, I should say, then lower Stafford on your draft board. He's going about QB 12. But otherwise, I think there's no reason, if you're pretty injury agnostic, I think there's no reason to lower him. Thank you for listening today, and we will talk some fantasy football again soon.